Good evening, all, and welcome. Please come join me. On tonight's menu, we have a selection of 15 well aged and refined ghost stories for your listening pleasure. I hope it's up to your liking. I would also like to extend a huge happy birthday to Elkie B. She is a star in the comments section. Many of you may have interacted with her or spoken with her in the past. Thank you for being so wonderful, Elkie. It's always great to read your comments. But without further ado, it's time to get comfortable. Grab your tablecloths and let the darkness take control. I work for a power company, restoring power after storms. I was working when a lady came up complaining that her power went out. We explained to her that's why we're there, and she should have her power back soon. She said, "Oh good, my son went into the basement and now I can't find him." I went with her with a flashlight down the road to a run-down house that was partially caved in. She walked inside and I went to follow. As soon as I walked into the door, she disappeared from sight. I called for her multiple times but no one responded, so I ran back to our work truck to call for help. A man that was living on her street called to me asking what was wrong, and I told him the situation. He looked at me with a cold stare and said a mum and her son died in that house 4 years ago. I'm still shaken to my core this very day. I've had a handful of paranormal experiences in my life. I would like to eventually share them all, but this was the first experience and it really scared me growing up. I haven't told many people, as it's kind of hard to bring up what you've seen, like a ghost, in normal conversations. Nevertheless, I wanted to share my experience with all of you to see what you think. I was 12 years old at the time, and my parents were in the early stages of a fairly nasty divorce. There was about a month-long span when my brothers and I knew something was up. My parents would have hushed arguments late into the night with the occasional outburst. These arguments normally ended with my mother leaving to stay at a friend's house for the night. One night during this period, I awoke to the sound of one of their brief outbursts. I immediately noticed it was significantly darker in our room than normal. We always slept with our bedroom door open and the hallway bathroom light on. However, tonight my door had been shut. This wasn't completely out of the ordinary during this time, since my parents would close our door when they were arguing in an attempt not to wake us. As my eyes adjusted to the darkness, I noticed the silhouette of a figure in front of my closed bedroom door. The best I can describe it, and bear with me here, is that it was a human-shaped dark grey form. It was semi-transparent and perhaps 5'4" or so. The figure was definitely human-shaped but had no details. I couldn't make out a face or any features. It seemed to have the shape, or maybe the feel, of a woman, which I know sounds crazy. Its transparency increased towards the knees, leading up to no feet, kind of like your stereotypical Casper ghost without the little tail. It stayed completely still but also seemed to be moving within itself, maybe like a swirling mist. I would make out a definitive outline and figure that I knew was abnormal. I was mortified. I stayed frozen in my bed for what seemed like forever, keeping my eyes locked on whatever was in my room. I felt like it was staring at me the whole time and was aware I saw it. I could still hear my parents' hushed arguments in the kitchen and decided getting to them was my only option for safety. However, this thing in my room was between me and them. Honestly, I do not know what the hell I was thinking, but I made a run for it. To this day, I can still vividly remember running as fast as I could, straight at the figure, bracing for impact with it, watching it vanish as I went through it, and slamming straight into my bedroom door, which is a little humorous looking back on it. But I remained composure, opened my bedroom door, and sprinted to the kitchen. By the time I reached the kitchen, my mum had just left, and my dad was shutting the garage door. I really can't remember what I told him, but I know I didn't tell him what had just happened. I'm pretty sure I just said I had a nightmare and wanted to sleep in his bed with him that night. He agreed and we went down the hallway to his room. I remember clutching onto him as we passed my bedroom and asking what was going on. But the rest of the night was uneventful. My parents officially separated about a week later, and for the next few months I had an extremely rough time sleeping at my dad's house. I would wake up in the middle of the night and would frequently stare at my doorway for the watching figure. Most of the time, when this happened, I would run to my dad's room and get into bed with him. I remember him asking what was going on, but I'd never tell him. I just said I was scared. And I'm sure he chalked it up to a child struggling with a divorce. I'm 27 now, and I think about this experience from time to time. I told my parents about that night a few years ago, and they both have each had their own unrelated paranormal experiences in their lives, and are open to the possibility that I truly did have a paranormal experience that night. My dad a little more so than Mum. Anytime we have talked about that night, she gets a little weird and says I could have dreamt the whole thing. But I know what I saw. Upon further reflection, I really don't think that it was a negative being. I was scared at the time, but never felt like it wanted to hurt me. I think I was more scared of not knowing what it was and knowing that it wasn't normal. Sometimes I feel like it could have been a relative, perhaps my grandmother who had passed away that was watching over my brothers and I while we slept, or while we were going through the divorce. Regardless of what it was, it really changed my life, and I wanted to share this with all of you. In October, for fun, I booked a tour for myself and my boyfriend done by an incredible company here in Canada. I've taken tours with them before, and I loved their storytelling, knowledge of history, and my region, and it was a nice outdoor, socially distanced activity for my boyfriend and I. The tour itself was of a nighttime tour of a historical pioneer village with buildings dating back to the 1800s. I'd been there before many times as it's a very popular spot for a school day trip and overall a beautiful couple of acres of historic buildings from across my province having been transported to recreate a historic village. The tour was going great and the guide was telling some interesting stories and history. We had visited the barns, old mills, original house of the first family that settled there, the church and the cemetery. I hadn't felt anything all night except just some hyper-awareness of my surroundings, but as we approached a house, the guide asked if we would like to hear the next story from inside or outside the house. The group enthusiastically said inside, and the guy said, "Okay, just know that you made that choice." As we entered the house, I immediately felt uneasy. The inside felt heavy, and the energy sticky. Making our way into a room, I felt my head begin to pound. I spoke up to the guide saying, "I do not like this house, I'm getting a headache." Another woman in the group said she was also feeling a headache and lightheadedness. As the guide told me that many people felt that way, and they'd even had people faint inside the house on tours before, and encouraged us to step outside if we felt the same. I felt this force pushing on my shoulders, pressing them inwards, as though the house was caving in on me, pressing me in every direction. I'd never felt anything of the sort and spoke up, leaving the house with my boyfriend. He followed to make sure I was okay. As soon as my foot crossed the threshold of the house, my pounding and headache and pressure went away as though lifted off me. As I turned around to perhaps go back into the house because I felt a little silly and wanted to hear the story, my feet would not let me go back towards it. I was physically unable to move my body in the direction of the door. The guide finished telling the story of the house and came outside to tell me the story and ensure that I was okay, while the rest of the group finished taking a look and taking flash photos to see if they could catch pictures of departed souls. It turns out the house belonged to a rather angry reverend and was originally located in my hometown about an hour and a half north. A few streets away from where I grew up, in fact. It was relocated to the historic town. The reverend was an angry man who tended to hit people with a Bible, saying he would pound the word of God into their head. This is the time I add that I do not necessarily believe in religion and consider myself more agnostic. They have also blocked off the top of the house because so many people have been pushed down the stairs by unseen hands. Children have also reported the man upstairs does not want us up here. The rest of the tour went off without any further experiences, but that was just the strangest thing that I can't explain. I guess the Reverend did not like an agnostic, godless woman in his house. I am from Germany. Back in 2011, our family moved from my childhood home village to a nearby town called Buchberg. We moved into a half-timbered house from the 16th century, which was a listed building. My mother had just taken over a restaurant and was always very stressed at this point. I was 12 years old and had to grow up very early because my mother had to be able to rely on me while she had to take care of her restaurant. Me and my sister's room were outside my parents' apartment and had a real front door, so to speak of. As it was such an old building, the floor consisted almost entirely of wooden floorboards, which, in isolated places, creaks quite thickly when you step on them. One of those places was right at the entrance of my room, maybe 2 or 3 steps away from the door, which was also one of the loudest places you could step on. But these spots only creaked when there was lengthy weight on it, so it wasn't enough if I threw a shirt there or something. After living there for about a year and a half, I woke up for the first time through the creaking of the floorboards in the middle of the night, which I couldn't really understand at this point since I only woke up, and since I couldn't find an explanation, I dismissed it as a normal sound made by the wood and went back to sleep with a quite easy feeling. For weeks nothing happened, until I woke up again to this squeaking. This time, not as sleepy as the last. I quickly realized it wasn't normal. It was loud and violent, as if someone was standing on the squeaky spot intentionally. I thought I was going completely crazy, and could no longer trust my perception after the floorboards did not stop creaking for more than a minute. I couldn't take it anymore, and ran over to my mother's bedroom and told her crying what was going on. My mother still thinks that I dreamt it. And so the squeak happened every now and then, and over time I gradually lost the fear of it. It was around 9 or 10 months since the first incident, when something new happened. The door would open and close by itself. One of our faucets suddenly turned on in the middle of the night, and our cats would just stare at nothing and start hissing and growling. The longer we lived there, my entire gut feeling became increasingly more uncomfortable. I would more often than not feel that I wasn't alone. It was almost as if I had someone sitting on my shoulder who was with me no matter where I was. It was almost overwhelming. And then there was the one night after which I couldn't sleep in my room for 3 weeks or so. I was in my bed just before falling asleep in the evening, when that stupid squeaking of the floorboard started again. In the meantime, more annoyed than fearful, I pressed my pillow onto my ears in the hopes that it would soon stop. But this time it was different. It didn't stop after the usual 2 to 3 minutes, but went on for 15, and slowly got louder and more intense until I looked up at some point. What I saw almost gave me a heart attack, and I could literally feel a shockwave go through my whole body together with goosebumps. I was so scared that I nearly vomited. I saw someone standing at the foot of my bed about 5 feet away just staring. Because of the shock, I was frozen and stared back for what felt like ages. In these fractional moments, I could see what was there. It looked like an old woman with a long shirt and curly hair. This expression on her face, it was disappointed, almost angry. But as I saw and realized all these things, she was gone again. I slept on our couch for a few more weeks. My mother didn't want to believe all of this. It seemed to me as if I were the only one who had noticed all these strange things. I think it was anywhere from a month to 3 months after the night I saw the old woman. At that point I turned 14. I came home from the cinema where I watched the second part of the Hobbit series with buddies. Later that evening I was lying in my bed, thinking about the film and what happened in it, when from one second to the other the floorboards began creaking again. That was the first time after the incident with the old woman that it squealed again, and fear rose up me like I'd never felt it before. I had hoped so much that the noises would just stop right away, but I was wrong. It was just like the last time, but this time I did not dare look to what made the noise. As I was lying there and the noises didn't stop, a feeling came over me that it won't stop until I looked. Finally I gave in, and when I looked, I was as shocked as the first time to see another person standing there, but this time someone different from the old woman. A man in his mid-30s with old clothes and a helmet with a broken lamp and a dirty face. Like the old woman, he just stood there and stared at me for a few seconds, wearing the same expression as her, before he vanished. Fortunately for me, we moved out a few weeks later, which is how everything ended, and since then nothing has happened to me. I myself never believed in such things as the paranormal, and even made fun of people who said they did. But I don't tell this to anyone now, because no one believes me, and they'll think I'm crazy for believing it myself. I can't categorize it properly, but I'm sure that I have some kind of trauma for it, and I'm confident that ghosts are real. I live in a town that was founded around 1830, and has seen more than its fair share of death, war, and massacres. So much so that lots of people are claimed to be haunted here, and you can walk over spots that hundreds perished on. I would even wager to say that the land I currently live on has most likely had a few soldiers die on both sides of the Civil War. Now, to what I experienced. I woke up one night past midnight. My dog rolled over in bed, and I opened my eyes in the near pitch-black room with a view of the corner next to my covered window. And from the corner of my eye I see something moving by the opposite side of the room. And there it is. A man dressed in a dirty, but not torn or raggedy Confederate uniform. I was afraid someone had broken in, but before I could even decide what to do, he floated with his head nearly touching the ceiling to the corner of the room by the window and stopped. He went through the wall, and he seemed to notice I was awake, and gave a sort of oops smile that unsettled me. I felt afraid, and debated whether I should wake my fiancée or not. But before I could finish deciding, I was so tired I fell back asleep, and only truly thought about what happened when I awoke that morning. The entire ordeal only lasted perhaps 10 seconds, but it was one of the strangest things I have ever seen in my life. I have a history of waking up and seeing small bugs for a few seconds, but I have never seen anything so large or vivid since. And I know it couldn't have been a dream, because in my dreams I have no sensation, but I did when this happened. This has honestly been bothering me for a while. Did I see something I wasn't meant to? Or was it a strange mind trick? Has anyone ever had anything similar happen to them? It was October 11th, 2001, 1 month after 9/11. I was 14 years old and my grandfather died in his sleep. An empty bottle of whiskey at his bedside. I was devastated. He was the best grandpa, and I could tell I was his favorite. At his funeral, I remember standing at his burial ceremony. I was a little further back than most of our family. I needed my space and I was grieving hard. I remember closing my eyes, folding my arms, and burying my head into my jacket, and crying. My mum then put her arm around me and cried with me. I felt her, heard her crying into my cheek, her voice mauled by my jacket. She let go and I opened my eyes. What I saw made my heart skip a beat. My mother was standing 20 feet in front of me. Everyone was. I looked around and realized I was completely alone the whole time. I don't know who hugged me. Maybe it was my grandpa. Maybe I mistook my grandpa's voice for my mother's. and to this day I'm still a little bit creeped out. A few years ago, I was about 10 or 11. During one family gathering, my dad and his siblings, my aunt and uncles, talked about their past experience in the old house that they were renting way back when they didn't have kids, me and my cousins. They talked about this ghost kid that was in the house running around and playing and making fun of them once in a while. I can tell you the detailed story about their experiences with the ghost kids, but let's focus on mine. And they kept talking about how the kid also lived in the same old house and perished in it, and the kid didn't receive a proper burial. I didn't believe that this ghost kid existed until this experience of mine. Me and my younger sister visited my cousin's house, aka the old house that they rented back then, since we lived in the same neighborhood. This cousin of mine was only 4 years old. It was only me, my cousin, my younger sister, and my aunt that were in that house. So we hung out and played until lunchtime. My aunt had to go out to buy us food, so me and my sister had to babysit our small cousin for a while. Here's where it gets weird. We were in my little cousin's room. My younger sister was in the bathroom, and I realized we forgot to turn off the TV because I could hear it from my cousin's room. So I went downstairs, turned it off, and went back up. But as I was heading into my cousin's room, I heard him laughing and giggling. So I assumed my sister had finished up with her business and went back into my cousin's room. When we went inside, there was no one else, but my cousin was giggling and facing a corner. So we asked him, "Hey buddy, why are you laughing?" "We were playing," he answered. "Who's we?" He didn't answer, and he continued to giggle. So I carried him out of the room and we went back downstairs with my little sister and waited for my aunt to get back. I got goosebumps when the realization hit me. Could this have been the infamous ghost child that they were talking about? The house which my parents bought and built had an already established building on it, right up to the back of the 1-acre property. It was a barn-style shed with a room up top. You know, 2 lower side sections and a high mid-section. Anyway, since then we renovated it and it's now 3 times bigger. The reason this property was for sale was the owner had passed away. In this case, inside the shed, working on his car via failing jack. I also enjoy working on my own car and regularly maintain it myself, so you'll often find me weekends or late nights tinkering around on one car or another. This one particular night, I was playing around with my wiring, figuring out some electrical issues and doing a service. All was well and it was around 11:30 p.m, with everything shut unless you're upstairs. I had been up there earlier as I had some tools and other stuff stashed out of the way, but I hadn't gone into the room, only the top of the stairs where there's a small area before the walled off room. But every time I'm up there, I checked the door is closed. So back to working on the car, radio is on a low volume and I had pushed a bunch of wiring serviced and rotated my wheels. Idiot me still had the front jacked up from rotating wheels and checking bearings without stands. Yes, I know it's stupid. I wasn't going to go under and made sure my limbs and fingers were out the way if anything dropped. I also have a habit of putting the wheel underneath the chassis for a failsafe. I figured I'd scoot under it and pull some wiring out from the rear of the body. The car wasn't going anywhere, and the front wheels are barely off the ground, as it's a 4x4 with 5-inch lift, so chances of 6 studs snapping and a car dropping from that is next to nothing. That's when my encounter begins. Once I'm underneath the car in the renovated area, I get this chill like one of those "I got a bad feeling about this" kind of chill. And that's when I hear these thunderous steps sprinting from the far end of the upstairs rooms through the shut door down the flight of stairs, in 4 steps, and suddenly the jack drops. Needless to say, I crapped the bed, froze like I was stuck in this particular snapshot of space and time. My butt puckered so much it began to prolapse. I didn't know what to do or where to go, but I sure as hell knew it was not a sheer coincidence. I sat there for 45 minutes just staring at those stairs, like if I took my eyes off them for any second, I would be consumed by whatever was up there. Of course, unable to get any assistance as my partner was in the house, and the shed's insulated enough that it doesn't get service unless the doors are open. Fortunately, she came looking for me and asked when I was coming home. I heard her coming, yet I was still staring at the stairs. After what seemed like an eternity, she opened the doors and sees me frozen in time, white as a sheet, staring at stairs, when she instantly notices something off, so stays at the door. I finally move and check the jack. Handles unwound completely. A failing ram does not unwind the handle. At this point I explain what happened, and we nope the hell out of the shed for the night. On the way I checked the window from outside. It was 100% closed. I don't know if this was a coincidence, or the old mate trying to teach me a lesson or something, or perhaps just wanting me to join him. But I can confirm it is as close as I've been to crapping myself since I was a baby. I haven't had any other strange encounters up there luckily, but I'm sure my days are numbered. When I was a freshman in high school, my dad and I would go visit my dad's best friend's grandfather, who was a World War II veteran, at his apartment. We'd go over there every month. It seemed for the better part of a year. We'd talk, watch movies, or play video game golf on his PS2. His name was Jacques. He was a great guy with a big personality. You knew he liked you if he picked fun at you. He was always open about his experiences. He would do anything for almost anyone that had his back, and he was so caring for his grandson and my dad. Most of his other family scammed him and left him, so we were all he really had left. During the war he trained what I was believed to be Louisiana, Fort Polk, and went through Africa and up through Sicily and Italy, earning a silver or bronze star and 2 Purple Hearts for his action. He, at his age, had a lot of health issues, as he was a big-time smoker, severe arthritis, and deaf in one ear due to the grenade that earned him one of the Purple Hearts. In July of 2012, he had some sort of heart issue, and paramedics had to be called. I only found out because one of his caretakers posted it on Facebook that he was in critical condition. Because of that, I sent him a message telling him to stay strong and informed his grandson, my dad's best friend, and he got on the phone and called him immediately. Shortly after their phone call, he passed away. Now for my encounter. Come my sophomore year for Spanish class, we had Dia de los Muertos, Day of the Dead, and we had to write a letter to a loved one or person who had passed away and seal it off. I wrote it to Jacques, telling him about how I missed him and hopefully how someday I'd get to see him again. That night, I woke up and I could smell his apartment. It was so vivid, I felt like I woke up in his living room. I couldn't see anything as I liked to sleep in the pitch black darkness, but I could feel his presence next to my bedside. Something about the way the figure stood next to my bed was comforting. I called out his name after realizing I felt him there. I reached out for him, and then the smell and him disappeared. It was comforting to be with him one last time. I wish I had more details, but I was only 15 at the time. I followed in his footsteps and currently in the US Army and have been in for almost 3 years, about to do 4, maybe more. Rest in peace, Sergeant Jacques Lemaire, aka Frog. August 29th, 1926 to July 10th, 2012. I lived in southern Ohio and was heading to church with my family when I was about 12 years old. My grandpa slowed down because there was a woman walking on the center line, wearing all white with long, dark hair. He swerved and she reached out and touched the van. Everyone got a crazy feeling. He stopped, looked around, and there was no one there. Can anyone explain that to me, please? My neighbor passed away last week, and since we moved in, we've been friends with him for about 15 years. A few months after he passed away, part of my family visited with their children. Everyone was outside with their kids when suddenly one of them pointed at the neighbor's property and said, "Where did the old man go? He was just there." My cousin, the father of the kids, just said that nobody was there and was a little confused, and everyone kind of laughed it off. But I think he was, just looking to check if everything was alright with us. Kinda gave me the creeps a bit, but I hope you rest in peace. I work on a dairy, and just the other night I had to clean the milk barn by myself. No one else was on the property, and as I was cleaning, I kept seeing something out of the corner of my eye. It looked like a little white face about knee height that was just staring at me. I saw the face near the corners of the barn, and when I turned there was nothing there, as if what I saw had just ducked around the corner. Then when I went out the gate to open the gate to the corral, I heard someone yell at me, even though everyone was gone. I, a 21-year-old man, called home for my dad to come help me finish up and calm down, but my parents were out for the night and no one answered. I finished and went home and had to sit there by myself until they got back. My family decided we would go on an organized ghost hunt at the neighborhood town. It was late at night and there were 3 sections to this. The first involved using a Ouija board type thing with a glass. Nothing happened. The second involved trying to reach out to spirits in a dark room. Nothing happened. The experiences come from the third section, which was a very old courthouse, and we used technology. Firstly, there was digital thermometers set up, and one of our family members was sat below one. These thermometers flashed when temperature spontaneously dropped from room temperature, supposedly a sign of a ghost. All of a sudden, this family member jumped up sort of spooked and moved seats while the organizers were explaining this to us and what we were going to do. He proclaimed he suddenly felt extremely cold and tingly. Lo and behold, the thermometer was also flashing and showing very low temperatures just right where he was sitting. That was odd enough, but the second experience was just as odd. I was in a room by myself with my uncle. I had an EMF meter that lit up in the presence of an electromagnetic field. I do know these devices work, however I don't know how legitimate the specific one I was holding was. I have my own one at home and it does react to real electrical sources such as my PC and the plug sockets. The other device I had was called a spirit box, which was supposed to detect words ghosts were trying to say to reach out to them. This device didn't convince me at all, and I'm still not fully convinced by it, but certainly more curious about it. I was asking questions, and the EMF meter was flashing in accordance to these questions. It seemed to work, but there was no telling whether it was legitimate or not. However, I wanted to push the boundaries of yes and no questions to see how realistic it all was. If a ghost was real, surely it can answer any binary questions as long as I give it 2 options, and the corresponding amount of flashes on the EMF meter for an answer, not just yes or no. So I did. I asked out loud, "Are you a man or woman?" Flash once for man, twice for woman. At the time, I wasn't convinced this would work and I was skeptical. However, the EMF flashed twice, and within 5 seconds of that, the spirit box displayed and read out loud the word female. 2 completely independent devices simultaneously confirmed the answer I supposedly got. That was a big deal for me, and still to this day, I cannot figure out an explanation for that, and the 2 devices remained consistent for that entire session. I hope for the existence or something beyond life, and this, for me, was a glimpse at some actual proof. My husband, my daughter and I moved into our colonial-style farmhouse last October. It was built in 1900, has 5 wooded acres that are about miles of conservation, and we have 2 neighbors far apart, both older retired people who would drive to our house if they needed to see us, which one has done, and they seem nice. When we moved into the house, my daughter started talking about an Uncle Fungo and wouldn't elaborate on it except to say Uncle Fungo is here. She was 2.5, so I figured it was from her show she watches, and still might be. He was mainly mentioned while playing with toys in the bath. It was fine until she said while playing, "Girls are trash." I was horrified, since she's not around anyone that would say anything like that. Plus, all the shows she watches are her screen age appropriate. So, where did she hear that? I ask her, and she says that Uncle Fungo said it. Anyway, I dropped the subject being weirded out, but fortunately she never spoke about it anymore. It was a very odd thing, and she'd never made up people before. We've also had incredibly bad luck while living here. But we love the place anyway, and I don't feel like there's anything necessarily bad or evil within the house. While exploring our woods, I found a wreck of a very old car in the woods that must have crashed down the hill and been left there. The trees grew around it and it looked rather somber. Must have been a bad crash too, since it's in a bad shape. Kind of eerie and unsettling. Not sure if that means the place is haunted or not. It's just the knocking that bothers me. Last January, my daughters were playing in the living room, and she can see the office from there. She yells to me while I'm in the kitchen that she sees something in the office and she's upset. I turn the light on in there since it's usually dark in that room, and there's nothing. I walk back to the kitchen and hear a very loud knock at what sounds like the front door. My daughter yells, "Visitors!" and we both go to the back door to find no one there. No cars around, and a passerby prankster knocker is highly unlikely due to our location. It freaked me out so much I called my husband. He said it was probably a woodpecker. It sounded nothing like a woodpecker, but I let it go. Months have passed, and it's been a hard year overall, not really having my mind on odd happenings. Now just yesterday, my daughter and I are getting ready for her dance class, and we hear a more normal knock. We both hear it and assume it's our neighbor who drives over sometimes. Unfortunately, it wasn't, and I'm freaked out. It's the knocking again. We've heard plenty of other sounds in the house, but that one is so specific. My house is haunted by many different spirits from kids to adults, not to mention I've named them all. A small girl called Mizu, a cat called Muffin, and a tall ghost man called Mr. No, a lady in the garage called Isabel, and a 4-legged creature called Sal, and a group of 3 ghosts that like to say goodbye that I've named the 3 Musketeers. They're usually quite friendly but can become hostile. There is one story about Sal that I would like to share. I lost my Apple TV cord about a week or 2 ago. I was on the verge of a panic attack because I knew my mother would beat the paranormal out of me if I didn't find it. So I was freaking out something hard in the kitchen, when something caught my eye. It looked humanish but was on all 4s and moving rather oddly. I blinked for a split second and saw it running towards my bedroom. I quickly run into my door and slam it shut, put my back on the door and try to keep it from coming in. At that moment, I was also texting my friend about it when all of a sudden it starts pushing on the door over and over as if trying to get in. I start crying as I was scared, and after a while I hear it leave, get up and turn off my lights. I start to fall asleep when 3 different voices whisper, "Good night," from my closet. I ended up falling asleep after that. Hey guys, it's Mort here, and thank you so much for following me on Twitter. You're not following me on Twitter? Guys, come on. You know where Twitter is. Go on, just give me a follow. You know you want to. There's some interesting things on there that I say that you don't even know about, and you need to be informed. Really. I'm just joking. I post a whole load of nonsense. But at some point I will post something important and I'd like for you to be aware of it first. So go ahead and follow me over there for, nonsense and stuff. Alright then, again, Elkie or Elk, I don't know if the E at the end is silent. I really hope you had a wonderful birthday. And thank you to all my wonderful members and patrons whose names can be seen on screen, just like at the end of any other video. If you want your name on here, well, I'm pretty sure you can figure out what to do. Info's in the description. If anything spooky or creepy has ever happened to you, you can share it with me, and I will very much share it with, my community, with you guys. If the story is up to scratch, just make sure you put in plenty of punctuation and paragraphing. Well, I hope you liked today's video. If you want more Mort, as some of you might do, there's a new video on screen now where I'm reading stories in Spanish. So if you could speak Spanish, nos vemos ahí.